Good morning. We're about to hear the second day of evidence of the undercover police Detective Chief Inspector, Mike Dell, who was DCI of the SDS between 2001 and 2005. We had a full day of evidence with him yesterday. He dropped quite a lot. I'm joined by Donald Driscoll of the Undercover Research Group. He dropped quite a lot of stuff yesterday. We discussed most of it, but there was a few things. We were chatting last night. I realized that I hadn't mentioned on the video, so I was just going to go through a couple of them.
No, there was. He's quite worth listening to because it's coming thick and fast.
Yeah. The one, which is something we'd never heard before, which was a surprise to me, was that they used support role players. These are people to come into the deployment to the undercover officers to act as friends or family or something. But they were military. Now, Mike Dell said, yes, we did use them. Unfortunately, not as much as I would have liked, but yes, we did use them. That's the first time that's been mentioned at all, I think, in any of this.
Yeah, no, that was a total blue. In fact, that entire document, that came in the wake of a document from Ian Palmer, who was the army psychologist, because they used army psychologists for the undercovers. Not clear why they had to be army, but apparently the army's got this sort of trauma-informed. But this is used. But
it's a wild world.
It was a very interesting document because the same document also talked about here's a group of people who've been self-selected by the peers to do a special job, and that's where the sense of exceptionalism is coming in. So in one document, we saw a whole new set of bits of the world. Yeah, as you said, we just hadn't seen before.
Yeah, no, I mean, that whole, we saw the Operation Hearn interview with Dr. Ian Palmer. This was someone who Mike Dell said, he wasn't friends with. He did go to his wedding, but he wasn't a friend of his. But I mean, there was a whole bunch of stuff in that, which...
there was a point that wasn't really picked up by the council there. Is that the undercover said they didn't like going to psychiatrists because they thought the psychiatrists would tell the management. Psychiatrists going, no, we wouldn't tell management. Dell kind of said, well, I would expect them to tell me the headline points. So no, it's like different points. Everybody's saying different things, and nobody's quite saying the same thing.
Well, his exact words were that if it was anything that I needed to know, I would expect Ian Palmer to tell me, but he would check with the officer first to agree to tell me, and if they disagreed, he'd still tell me, but they wouldn't see him again. Which is that's an amazing form of consent. That
well, just blow the welfare things up. Well, he didn't tell me anything, so it's very weird.
So, one of the other things that Ian Dell said, Ian Palmer said in his Operation Hearn interview, that it was female entanglements or the lack of them that was the biggest enemy of the undercover officers. Women were the enemy. I mean, proved right in the end, to be fair. I mean, like, it was the women who exposed this whole thing. But the idea that there wasn't misogyny baked in at every level, kind of, it's very clear that is the case.
But one of the amazing things about Dell's interview is, it's like he's very clear he's not a misogynist, but he's quite happy to use terms repeatedly about locking women up.
Yes, I mean, the whole thing about locking a woman in, he was trying to show that he wasn't a misogynist by saying, look, I locked a woman in a room to try and convince her to join the unit. And like this was just quite unbelievable. But then moments later, he was repeating it. And
he's like, he says, I carried around a list of seven women in the unit. I was like, my reaction, how creepy.
Yeah. I mean, the thing about locking the woman in a room to convince her to join the unit, you just got the impression here's a man who's used to locking people in rooms. I mean, whether it's like members of the public or other members of staff, it seems, I mean, that just seems to be. It was no big deal for him to lock somebody in a room.
Yeah, but also you have to look. He's not he's special branch, but he's not completely special branch. He's also TSG.
Yes.
So he's come in. He joins the police after Southall.
Yeah, just to say, the TSG is the Territorial Support Group. The Territorial Support Group, which was founded in 1987, he joined immediately. He was one of the first recruits. It was something that he chose to do, he wanted to do. Territorial Support Group used for public order situations. A little tidbit from yesterday, which I didn't mention in any of the videos, he said that he wasn't there at the poll tax riot. In fact, all but one of the units of the TSG were put on a rest day that day because he said the Met Police wanted to save money. They used their vans, and he said all their vans came back trashed.
Oh.
That was a nice little story, nice little heart warmer.
So, but again, there's this thing in one of the documents about special uniformed police being let off the leash by special branch, and he goes, "Oh, this is typical." I can't use the exact phrase he used. Special branch
hyperbole.
Hyperbole.
Yeah. I think actually he said hyperbole, but hyperbole is what he meant.
It's just like, but you put that in context. But he was TSG. He was leading figure in TSG. He's the police that were being let off the leash.
Yeah.
This isn't quite gelling. So he's got the sort of like, oh, I know how I'll deal with this. But when you add it, when you put it in context of other facts, it's not adding up. It's like he knows damn well that TSG were violent thugs.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just going back to the thing about the army, because I mean, yes, it's significant they were using army psychiatrists, but I mean, I think the using of the army role players suggests a level of connection and knowledge of the SDS operation by another aspect of the repressive state, which we haven't really appreciated before. I remember it was such a big deal when we found that there was such a strong link with MI5, that the security services were copied into all the reports. What is the relationship with military intelligence? How much of that, how much of that is there a crossover with? I mean, I'm not suggesting the police, the military were that interested in what the SDS were doing, but I mean, the fact that the SDS wanted to be close to them in some way, very interesting.
Yeah, and again, is one of those sort of like quiet patterns throughout, I think, right? Because there's it keeps coming up slightly, but the interactions with the Home Office, and hopefully at some point Dell will be asked about this, because he's the senior officer, he should be involved in those loops. The Cabinet Office, as you say, clearly the SDS is not quite the bubble it's been really betrayed as, including by officers. So a good question to ask is, how were the links with the military established? With MI5, it's now quite clear the patterns and how, to just rock up and go, hey, military, do you have a psychiatrist who will deal with our special things? That's quite a specific ask for that. So, yeah, there's definitely connections we are not seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing we did talk about yesterday, but I did a little bit more research on last night, the fact that there was 3 officers from the ethnic minorities who were, what he said was there was no racism in the unit. I had 3 officers from ethnic minorities, and one of them had a black wife. Which suggests the 3 ethnic minorities weren't black, but I mean that could be the case that they were. However, what I looked up was between 2001 and 2005, the number of ethnic minority police officers in the Metropolitan Police was a little over 1%. There's no wonder those officers have got anonymity, regardless of what their deployments were, because it's a very small group of officers to actually look at to work out who it could be. We haven't heard anything about those officers. The first time that's been mentioned. It suggests that there's areas of interest there, perhaps that are areas that we weren't familiar with before. Maybe it's something to do with family justice campaigns, given that in many cases it was very close family bonds and particular ethnic communities who were affected, and the campaigns were kind of based around. Maybe it's something else. We really don't know. I wouldn't like to speculate. But yeah, I think that's something which hopefully something which is a little door that's opened from the evidence of Mike Dell that hopefully we'll be able to get to explore further through his evidence. Is there anything else today you're hoping to hear more from him about?
Well, yeah, we've got a lot more to go into the Operation Lime. So you remember Dell is from 2001 to 2000.
It was July 2001. Yeah, till May 2005.
So you have a lot of issues in the units that have started on the previous, but he's catching them. He's trying to deal with them. I suspect we'll hear more about relationships, the office moves, the fallout from Operation Lime, and a large focus on what sort of policy changes. We've still not got to the bottom of why he made his pronunciation about not having sexual relationships. There's a whole bunch of things that clearly not adding up there. We'll have the problems with Carlo Soraki, deployment, the multiple relationships, but also the travel, what else, the fake firebombing plots. I think criminality and his policy around criminality, because he's very clear that having sexual relationships is illegal. But so is breaking all the other laws also illegal stuff. So you can't have it both ways. So I think there's going to be a lot more of that, and we'll also probably start getting to looking what happens when the police start merging special branch and form counter-terrorism unit, which caused lots of problems and lots of dissatisfaction.
Yeah, his whole thing about law breaking. I mean, that was he had a lovely way of phrasing it, which I think like speaks volumes about the way that police officers, particularly senior police officers, see the law. He said, of course, they were, when we were authorizing these undercover officers to commit crimes, it was just a protocol. It wasn't that they had legislative backing for that. Each one of those things would have to stand up on a case-by-case basis in front of a court, which is basically what all laws are. Everything needs to stand up on a case-by-case basis in front of a court, and that kind of mentality I think speaks volumes about the way that these police officers regard the law and treat law breaking by themselves or their officers.
It's an inconvenience. But on his language as well, he kept using the word miscreants.
Yes.
Which is grating on his pretentiousness. But also, a miscreant is not quite the same level as a criminal. It's just something you give a tokenistic slap, say, go on your way. It's like he still sees the rapists as miscreants. It's like they're criminals. They were out breaking the law. They were deceiving people into relationships that were just plain abuse. You cannot just label them as miscreants. So I think through his language, he's letting slip that he still sees. And I think he's quite clear about it. The unit was full of good officers.
Yeah, he said that though. I mean, apart from the closed officers, which he's not allowed to talk about, I don't think there's any of the open officers who he hasn't in some way criticised. Though, I mean, so who are these good officers you can talk about, Mike? Because I haven't heard any yet. It'd be interesting as well that I think yesterday a lot of people talked about the change in his demeanour after each break. He was at his most open and his most candid before the first breach. After that, he started saying he didn't remember things. By the end of the day, we had a very fuzzy, much more guarded witness.
I think he was also quite emotionally affected in many ways. And I'm not saying that that he needs sympathy. It's because it was clear that his lies were unraveling and his self-image of him and the unit that he ran for 4 years was crumbling, and he didn't have the resources to deal with it.
Yeah, you didn't have the personal resources to deal with the grilling either. We're heading in fairly soon. Hopefully, we're not faced with a witness who was markedly changed from the first day and is going to come out with a whole new bunch of bullshit. And we saw that with Mark Jenner. We've seen it with lots of witnesses after they've had a short break and had a chance to speak to some of their friends and ex-colleagues. We hope he's going to be candid. I do feel...
But you just remind me, he's still in contact with a lot of his ex-colleagues. He's still very much embedded.
Yeah. I do feel that he is likely to say something to put the record straight about the timeline from yesterday, because he was getting confused. He was attempting to confuse people, I think, and he didn't have that timeline straight in his mind. He was acting like he was working it out on the stand, which is never a good look. All right, anything else you'd like to add?
Expect more interjection submitting. He's very engaged with this witness.
Yes, absolutely. All right, please join us at lunchtime. We'll do another video then. So in first break, rather, during the first break, all the breaks and lunchtime, end of the day. Please like, share, subscribe to these videos.